Now our closer look, a rare inside look at the terror group ISIS. Chilling new details from a top commander who says he was there when the group was formed. ISIS began inside a U.S. military prison in southern Iraq called Camp Bucca, a site I've reported from in the past, where the U.S. detained hundreds of extremists. Reporter Martin Chulov interviewed that ISIS commander as part of an extraordinary article in The Guardian. He joins us now from Beirut. Martin, tell us what that commander said.
He is saying that he and jihadists like him were all within 100 meters of the entire al-Qaeda leadership. He says it was the breeding ground for ISIS as we know it now. They used that time in prison to sit, to network, to organize, and to plot for what might come. That said, he didn't know that, that a decade down the track, the man amongst them, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was very active in prison life, would emerge as the leader of this formidable terror organization. And what did he say about al-Baghdadi, the leader at the time when he was in that prison with him? He said Baghdadi was a man who had clear leadership skills, who seemed to be plotting from the very beginning. He set himself up as an arbitrator for disputes within the camp. He conciliated, and he was given more or less open access around the Sunni area of the prison by the American military. His jailers were enamored by him. They saw him as a calming influence and somebody whom they could trust, and he was released after 9 months in late 2004. One of the things that's so extraordinary about your article is this ISIS commander seems to be having second thoughts, like he wants to get away from ISIS but can't. Yeah, he said to me that in the early days, in 2004 and even a bit beyond that, shooting at American tanks in Fallujah or Ramadi, it was almost fun. It was almost an adventure. He was a young firebrand jihadist at that time. He was railing against an occupation. This was a broad Sunni revolt in his mind, as opposed to an Islamic theocracy in the making, a particularly brutal theocracy. He says a decade later, with this organization having carved such a swathe out of the center of Arabia and imposing a very hardline interpretation of Sharia law across the region, and he doesn't want to be a part of it anymore. He says that some of what ISIS does he believes in, but most of it he doesn't. He thinks that they interpret the religion in a wrong way. He thinks that this brutal imposition is not the way forward. Yet at the same time, he doesn't feel as though he can leave. He's still very active within the upper echelons of ISIS, and he thinks that if he does leave, he'll be killed. So he feels trapped by his circumstances. As probably many others do as well. Thanks very much, Martin. Let's dig into this now with our experts. ABC contributor and former director of the National Counterterrorism Center, Matt Olsen, and Tom Friedman, Pulitzer Prize-winning author and foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times. Welcome, gentlemen. I want to start with you, Tom, and your reaction to that report from Camp Bucca. This is one quote from that piece. ISIS can't be stopped now. This is the commander speaking. This is out of the control of any man.
Well, ISIS can be stopped now, Martha, but it can only be stopped by the Sunni Muslims under its rule. And I think that's really the question for American strategy going forward. What would induce the Sunni Muslims now under ISIS's rule, the tribes and the residents of big towns like Mosul, to actually rise up against them? And I think we have to go back and look at the surge. As they've risen up in the past. As they did in the Anbar uprising. Well, then the strategy was clear, hold, build. We'll help you clear out, the jihadis, and you hold it and then you build it. I think we have to completely reverse that strategy. I think our strategy today has to be build, then clear and hold. What do I mean by that? These Sunni Muslims under ISIS control are not going to take a promise from Baghdad anymore. I think we have to create a Sunnistan that is parallel to Kurdistan, that is a federally semi-autonomous Sunni region. Promise the Sunnis there that if they rise up against Mosul, they will not be under a pro-Iranian government in Baghdad. They will have their own autonomous rule. And Matt Olsen, you were heavily involved in looking into ISIS. I think you told me the other 20, 30,000 fighters. Did this kind of plan work?
I agree with Tom at a general level. The numbers are big, 20 to 30,000 fighters by some estimates, but the group's not invincible. And we've seen that recently with the airstrikes, over 1,000 U.S.-led coalition airstrikes over the past few months. And they've shown that this group is not invincible, turned back the momentum that ISIS had over the summer.
Do you really think that means they're not invincible? I mean, the airstrikes, everybody in the military, everybody in the government will say that's not going to do it. You have to do something on the ground. And that really seemed to stop it, and they moved in other places. I mean, look at Mosul, and there was a terrific New York Times story about that. New York Times described Mosul as a life of deprivation, fear, and confusion for the city's roughly 1 million remaining residents. Iraqi police officers, there are fears that they're training they will just sell their weapons to the jihadists or run, which
they're building another failed state. There's no question about that in my mind, Martha. But there's one, I think, fundamental rule of the Middle East that one can draw from the last decade and a half of our experience, that the Middle East only puts a smile on your face when it starts with them. When they own it, it is self-sustaining. When we own it, it is not self-sustaining. And we've got to create the political environment where they are going to want to own the overthrow of ISIS.
And Matt Olsen, I just want to talk, because this is always on people's minds, the threat to the homeland. ISIS, I don't think either one of you believes is a threat to the homeland yet. And yet we hear things.
Sure. You know, at a strategic level, ISIS, their leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, has talked about the U.S. being a strategic enemy. But right now, it's really a potential threat to us here at home. The most likely scenario of an attack would be someone here, an isolated individual who's inspired by their propaganda, perhaps a fighter who returns from Syria, a relatively small-scale type attack. Now, it is a potential threat, and left unchecked, down the road, we could see ISIS posing a greater threat to us here in the United States.
And I am still astonished by those numbers, 20 to 30,000 fighters. That's a huge group, much larger than al-Qaeda in the old days there in Iraq. Thanks to both of you.